the ongoing move away from car ownership in London will continue.
Seems like a hard thing to disagree with, but there's a long backstory, I think.
You have to have a slightly different approach to what the community needs.
What can you compromise on?
Hang on a minute. Hi, I'm Alice Astor and I'm Corporate Director for Neighbourhoods and Regeneration at Brent Council in North West London.
Alice, thank you so much for joining us at this UKREiiF special episode. And I'm going to start off with a reflective question. So as Brent's Director for Neighbourhoods and Regeneration, you're at the heart of shaping places and policy. But was there a moment in your past that shaped the way that you approach the role that you do today?
I think when I think back even to my teenage years and was doing geography, O-level, I am that old, I know. I was always interested in the urban geography bit, towns and cities. And then as sort of I did geography A-level and I did geography at university. And as my sort of interest in it, it became crystallised. What I was really interested in was how people behave in space. So I was interested in the sort of psychology of the way the built-in and unbuilt environment can impact on people's behaviour and choices. So that was sort of what got me interested in and led me to then go on and study town planning. And then I got my first job at Westminster Council. And I do remember one significant moment where I hadn't been there very long, so a few weeks. It was when I was allowed out on my own, for my first site visit on my own. And it was for some air conditioning units, because that's what you get when you're a graduate planner at Westminster Council.
They're quite contentious though in Westminster probably, aren't they?
Yes, they probably are. Well, this one wasn't contentious, but this one was located on the flat roof behind the Coca-Cola sign at Piccadilly Circus.
Nice.
Now, I loved London. I was in my mid-20s. It was a blast. It was a great place to work. So that was my planning you had me at hello moment, really, when I was on the flat roof,
on the rooftop,
looking at the site for some air conditioning units, but behind the Coca-Cola sign of Piccadilly Circus. That sort of hooked me in, I suppose. And then since then, yes, I've just been fortunate enough to work in some really interesting places. Always in London. I've lived in London since the early 80s now. Just some really interesting projects, and it just got better and better. Air conditioning units to Wembley Park,
Did you get a view across the whole of London, or were you just behind?
No, it was just behind the signs, but wow, how exciting.
I love it. I still love that. I still love climbing around on rooftops in London. It's the best thing, particularly when there's no safety things. You have to climb out a roof line.
There's some mad back
wander around near St Paul's
in the city and things.
Oh,
there's sort of this whole back landscape of roofs and things where you've got like no roads, no anything. It's quite a weird.
But one of the things, now in my current job in Brent, we have quite a lot of high buildings now. We do. It's the norm, sort of 20, 30 stories. But I've been fortunate enough to see inside some of them, and of course most of them have these lovely roof gardens now, communal areas. So if you're up there, the views across London are just, I could look at them all day, really could.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be unattached on the top roof of one of those ones.
No, that's true. But I do think that's something that has changed. We were talking just before about kind of things that have changed. I remember as a kid in London, there wasn't many places you could get up high and look across London. Yeah. That has completely changed in the last 20, 30 years, that there's accessible community spaces within buildings and also the tall buildings that are happening. So you've got quite a different cityscape. So you mentioned you worked at Westminster before, you worked at a number of different local authorities. I was just sort of interested in, is there any dots that join those together? Is there any principles that you've learned in your journey through different local authorities that you can share with us?
So I worked at Westminster, then Camden, then Islington, and then I spent 10 years at the Local Government Association running the Planning Advisory Service, which meant working with local planning authorities all over the country, although not being a planner, but working with them. And then I've been at Brent since 2016. And I think my overriding point would be places are very different, even though, there's lots of similarities in terms of development proposals. The places are different and you have to respond to their uniqueness. So even though Westminster, Camden, Islington they're all joining each other as you sort of move further out, the communities are different and the needs are different. So you can't just have what's a blueprint, or what's the word? I don't know. something
standardised approach.
textbook. Yeah, you have to, which is why we have local plan making, really. And even within a local plan, I mean, our local plan at Brent at the moment is very much focused around Brent as a composite of different places. The south of the borough is very, very different from the north of the borough. You probably know that from the work that you've done in it. So you have to have a slightly different approach to what the community needs. So I think whilst most of us who work in the sector, we want to see good development happen, we want to facilitate it, we want more housing, you still have to be very aware of, the street it is in almost, and the community that's around it, and the incoming community that will be coming into the new places as well. So, we have some fundamental consistent principles about good planning, or good growth as we might call it now. But, these impacts can be very localised, and you have to take that into account.
You teed up the next question very well, though. Which is the transformation in Brent over the last 2 decades has been, I would say, almost without parallel in London in terms of the scale of it. But as planners, how do you balance the pressure to deliver housing, economic growth, and change with creating places that the people that already live there still want to live?
It's really difficult. So it's like balancing on the edge of top of a pin, I suppose. I mean, planning is all about balancing. It's all about taking the different needs, the different requirements, prioritising and balancing them. And to a certain extent, you can't please everybody all the time, but if you're annoying lots of people, then you're probably doing something right.
Equally unhappy, no.
So no, it's really difficult. So we do get quite a lot of resistance to some of our development proposals. Some people think, so at Wembley Park, which is where the biggest regeneration and longest standing regeneration area, I think, is in Brent, all around the stadium. I mean, that was first conceived of, long before I was working there, but that was sort of conceived when the stadium decided to redevelop there, which must have been 20 years ago. That decision was made, over 20 years ago, possibly. Anyway, however, it was quite a long...
No, I think it would have been open 20 years ago.
It might have been, So it was conceived of a long time before that. But that was the trigger for some people at Brent Council to think what you could do with all of that land, because it was industrial.
I remember I went to the Jubilee
Line opening, wasn't it? It was the new Jubilee Line extension that connected.
I don't know when that station opened, but part of that was the upgrade of the station.
I went to Wembley when it was just first opened, and it was unbelievable. Like, if you go there now, it was just like single-story warehouses, and actually some totally undeveloped, just like sort of some that had just been knocked down and left.
Absolutely,
nothing there.
And I think it's fantastic, and it was actually in a recent Sunday Times list of the best places to live in the country. It was listed as one of those. So, it has been absolutely transformational. But some people around, they get annoyed at all the events that are happening because the event numbers are increasing. They think Wembley's full up, that there's enough now. I don't personally. I think there's still a lot more capacity, and the regeneration there is still more to come. We have got integrated into the developments a new medical centre, because residents always say, well, what about the doctor's surgery as well? Actually, this has delivered a new doctor's surgery. We did have a site allocated for a school, but actually capacity shows we all know about falling school primary roles in London. So we just don't need one because we have capacity in nearby schools. That we've got the LDO for all the entertainment service and leisure facilities. So, existing and new residents have got access to all of that, which just wasn't there before and wouldn't be there without the regeneration and the development. So, in a context
like that, it's hard to imagine people being that resistant to more change, because most of those people that are living there must have been living there recently. Given that there was before that, it was like light industrial. Anybody that lives there must be relatively new. Yes,
but on the edges, it's not very far away from those old industrial estates and car parks, that there are sort of long-standing residential, and then the more suburban areas as you sort of go up the Met Line or the Jubilee Line.
What you're saying is making me think of a couple of different things. One of your first answers was about what joins together different places, and actually it was about the difference in a way. It was about the kind of individuality or the localness of it. We spoke to John Stiles, who's in part of the Brent Council, part of the team, and he's got a really interesting view, and he was talking about place shaping, not just place making, and the need to actually connect back to what's already there in kind of good place making. So it's sort of about evolving those places as you go, which I thought was a really interesting way of going about that. So I thought, with that in mind, what do you think makes great placemaking? And, you know, are there any key ingredients, magic sauce, that you've, from your years of experience, seen?
Oh, well, goodness, that's... well, what makes great places? The communities that live there. You know, if they're not invested and enjoying their life. I know it's difficult at the moment because there's so much inappropriate housing that some people are having to live in, but, you know, generally speaking, it's the community that lives there. It is the access to a range of facilities that you need to live a good life. You know, I don't want to start talking about 15-minute cities because that whole thing's got a little bit hijacked, but actually the principles of having easy access to the fundamentals that you need.
Seems like a hard thing to disagree with, but
I know. And open space. You know, there's a lot more evidence now, isn't there, about the health, the mental and physical health benefits of having access to open space and greenery.
Yeah,
I mean, that is the one thing I sort of do regret about Wembley Park, although it is, you know, it's a innerish London urban area, is if you want to go for a nice walk or a run or something, I mean, there's lots and lots of trees and there are different bits of parks and things, but, you know, there's not that great big expanse, although they are about to finish a 7-acre park at the moment, but you'd have to go up to the reservoir, I suppose, or Frank Country Park, which is not that far away. I'm complaining about nothing really, but just when I'm walking around there when I'm at work in the office, you know, I sometimes think, I wish I could see a bit more
I think
greenery.
You're right, though. I do think there's this juxtaposition, as we, you know, we're pro-development generally, you know, we're architects, we're interested in that, but the need to bring in more green space, and maybe some of the opportunities that changes in space, changes in transport. I know, Ollie, you've been talking about that might create kind of more green space in the kind of public realm.
35 square kilometres of parking in London. So if you do, we were talking about driverless cars before we start, this is why I keep wanging on about it. But the 35 square kilometres of space given over to parking that could disappear and be replaced with green planting on the side of each trees. They're very thin houses because they're sort of on the edge of roads. But yes, parking, I suppose, car parks, yes.
Yeah.
Parking on the side of roads, you could get rid of that. And you could replace them with... 15-minute cities seems a weird thing to get so angry about, what people have. So I think replace it with walkable cities and street trees. You know, start using that expression. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, it's just the soundbite of it. If you make people go, can I walk to the shop and can I have a...
But also street trees do so much more than, just like having green infrastructure. If you start thinking about your landscape as infrastructure, you know, how do you connect nodes of planting so that you're always within the shade of a tree?
Yes.
Like, you can really transform the environment.
I mean, we have spent some of our community infrastructure levy on trees, you know, because we see it as part of the urban infrastructure that is needed to make a place attractive, and it has lots of other benefits as well to do with the...
I think it's so important. I think, you know, we were talking anecdotally before about happiness, and that actually a lot of people in today's society become less happy, and I do think nature, greenery, those kind of things has a huge positive impact on that, and I think that we are kind of, maybe as designers and planners have an obligation to try and to really push that.
But I think that is becoming more integrated into planning. I wouldn't like to think what a reason for refusal might be that says you're not making people happy enough, or this will make people unhappy, or, you know, do you know what I mean? I can't see how it would be ever translated into a reason for refusal.
I reckon a committee could give it a go.
I've probably seen a couple go.
But I do think, because we know something much more about it now, that it is being taken into account much more by designers and architects and
you've got the urban
planning authorities.
Biodiversity net gain.
No, but that's not about happiness. I mean, like, it's not.
But I'm saying there's an integral connection between. Well, this is my opinion. Is that it's a very hard thing to judge how you make people happy.
But it's hard to make policy out of it, and I think that urban greening factor is a really good example of, like, what do you want? Green cities. How do you get it? Little bits of sedum on roofs. You know, the policy doesn't quite give you what you're trying to achieve.
We have in our one of our supplementary planning documents, the title of which has just left me, but it is about the quality of place, and we have a quality of place framework, which is embedded in the supplementary planning document, and so developers are supposed to, you know, apply this sort of framework. It's a round drawing with different indices on, but it is about things like access to proximity to and access to open space and greenery and, you know, blue-green infrastructure, etc.
I mean, that's a good point, actually. You know, we have quite a lot of developers that listen to the programme. In terms of if they were coming to your team, would you have any recommendations or things not to do that you'd share?
Well, when lots of applicants talk about the difficulties in the local authority planning sector and they want certainty, and I do give a slightly simplistic answer, but it's like we do have a plan-led system. We've got a plan. The closer you are, your development, to what the plan wants you to do, the more certainty you have, the quicker it will be dealt with and the more straightforward it will be. Now, I know perfectly well that there are very few developments that tick every single relevant policy just because, there's too much. So, there's always a job which we sort of do collectively about working out what is the most important thing, affordable housing, by the way, and what you can compromise on. Actually, I've got a point I'd like to make about that if I get the chance.
What can you compromise on?
Hang on a minute. No, it's just my advice to developers is get as close to the local plan as you can, and if you can't, then we want a good reason as to why not. The point I was going to make, which is a bit of a sort of point about the national planning system, I suppose, is I have the planning service in my directorate, but I'm not that close to particular schemes or anything anymore. But there are so many, you will know, about all the expectations that the planning system is supposed to deliver. When I started my career, it was about land use and design. The delegated reports were a box on one side of A4. It was land use and design, and now there is so much more. I'm not necessarily saying that's wrong, because planning is a mechanism to deliver good quality, good growth, good quality built environment. But my point is, there is so much that a developer has to do that is fixed and not negotiable. The BNG, carbon offsetting, the community infrastructure levy, etc. That the only thing left to negotiate is on affordable housing or Section 106 obligations. But affordable housing is the thing we want most. Yeah. But that's the thing that gets the focus of the discussions because of the impact on viability of all the other asks.
It's a really good point, because we've been looking at the number of starts on site is significantly down across the capital, majorly down, and I do think many developers are citing the kind of landscape of legislation, and all of these are well intended, BNG and all the rest of it, but actually the combination. And is there a way to, do you have any thoughts about how you could simplify that, trying to keep the kernel of the important stuff while maybe getting more affordable housing? Because there's not private development happening, there's also not affordable housing happening. So you've got a kind of double whammy on the kind of already stretched market.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to start sort of ripping up legislation because it's be a bit sort of off the cuff. But I just think there has to take a thorough look at what is it we want the planning system to deliver, and recognising that it just can't reasonably deliver everything.
I also don't think that the housing starts being down is anything to do with the planning system.
No, it's building control and building safety regulation.
That and
at the moment, that's
and the viability,
maybe. And I don't think the plan
The viability is affected by planning, as in the set of requirements for all the different.
Is there anything that planning can do that would improve, that would turn the tap back on? It's possible that
to get better. I do think
things
the
are still going through.
does help a bit.
Things are still going through the planning system. You're still getting planning for stuff. It's just not getting started on site.
But it's slow and costly, and the contributions. If you ask most developers, the civil contributions, the Section 106, all the different legislations, all kind of well-intended, environmental, fire, everything else. The combination means that your build cost has gone up in an already inflated market.
Yeah.
So
the planning system could just deregulate some
well,
of
I was just wondering if there's more. It's a difficult question, isn't it? But the ultimate thing is, can you distill the key ingredients? We've kind of had an additive system of constantly putting on things. Or could you incentivise certain behaviours by not,
I was reading on the train on the way up here, actually, it's a recent article by Centre for Cities about the reforming the what they called anti-supply side. And I hadn't really thought about this, but one of the things was about the minimum room size for a single person flat at 37, and their argument was that it's unaffordable. It's just unaffordable in that renters can't afford it. So I don't really agree with reducing the minimum size by much, because I don't think people should be living in rabbit hutches. Co-living's a different model because you have all the other facilities.
But why is it? It's a good point. Why is co-living different? Because co-living is now established, and you've got this thing that is essentially a hotel room, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're designing them, but then you've got a big jump up to the next thing on the market. So you've got 18 square meters.
That was their point.
And then you jump up to 37, and there's nothing in between.
That was exactly the point they were making.
Almost the same discussion with Paul about how Pocket came along 20 years ago and innovated something that doesn't align with policy at all. It's only one beds according to him, or studios according to me, and it doesn't align to any local authority planning policy. But they made it work, and I think that the system needs to have flexibility to allow people to do different things. To say, I'm going to do co-living, but with studios or studios or whatever. But it doesn't. Studios are
3DOs.
And
so
studios are two studios that are interconnected. They have them in the Middle East. I can't remember what they're for.
Is it like a kind of like if you're friends and you want to share a room next door?
They have them in New York as well. Yeah, I think it's. I don't know actually. I'm out of my depth.
You're making
here.
this up again.
No, studios is a thing. I just can't remember what it is.
One of the other things that again I hadn't really thought about, because it's so many years since I was in development management as a planning officer, but was about the dual aspect requirements and the way and it did the drawing of how you have to have these insets,
really
but it just
hard.
makes it more expensive. And I'm not necessarily
The
saying
GLA
it would be the right thing
to relax that slightly.
Because
Because 65% now is pretty hard to achieve.
We were talking about this earlier, and we always look, often comes up and is a really good model, which is the mansion block, and actually a lot of that is single aspect and a really good quality home. And I think the intention's right with the dual aspect kind of approach, because there is some terrible kind of things that have been built, but I think it's too inflexible, and I hope that's encouraging.
And it's harder when it's north facing as well.
With north facing,
it's hard when it's all south facing as well.
North facing, you shouldn't do it. I think like north facing single aspects being banned is fair play. Whatever. That's I can be on board with that. But trying to get 65% on some sites just is really hard.
Yeah.
I've got a particular site in mind at the moment where it's a difficult. It's
virtually impossible while it stops development. In that you need to have a holistic view, and planners can do that sometimes by balancing all the different things, but they can be when the big policy, if you're against a policy in principle, then you start having issues, you know what I mean, and it's harder and harder.
But that's the planners when the planners are doing their job well, it's to work with the team to tell them what bits they can ignore. Because you can't,
absolutely.
You can't.
Where you compromise.
And I think Brent are pretty good at that. And I think other boroughs could learn something from that.
Well, thank you. I like to think we're pragmatic, because we want to see things get built.
And they do get built. And that's the sort of testament, is that you can see a lot has happened.
Having said that, we do still have some stalled sites that we want to revisit to see if we can help.
Well, so how can developers help you there? How can they help with those stalled sites?
Well, they need to tell us what's stalling, I suppose, and then we can work around.
And do you have quite an open door policy in terms of coming to see who would be the best person for them to come and approach?
Well, probably the head of planning, David Glover, I don't know if you've come across him, or Jerry Ansell, who's the director.
Yep.
So, final question.
Say me.
Final question. This is a tough one. So the policies and decisions that you're making now will be translated into neighbourhoods that are in 10 years' time are up and running, existing, built out, lived in. What do you hope that those neighbourhoods are like?
Happy places, I want them to be. No, I think we're about to sort of embark on our local plan review, so it's a sort of timely for us to think about what things are going to be like in 10 years' time. I think the ongoing move away from car ownership in London will continue. We were mentioning driverless cars earlier, so I don't know. I'm doubtful whether they'll be common on our streets by members of the public by 10 years' time. I think they'll be used in industry and things, but we'll see about that. But anyway, they will come at some point, won't they? That will come. So the ability to free up all of that parking space, at home, domestic driveways and things, as well as sort of car parks and on-street parking, I think that could, really transform the landscape. But even without driverless cars, I think in London, I know we moan if we have to wait more than a couple of minutes for a tube train, but honestly, how lucky are we that we only have to wait a couple of minutes for a tube train? So, the transport system in London, the Elizabeth line has been, fantastic. Brent's got 22 train stations, I think, within the borough. I think it's got the most in London. So, and younger people just see a car as an expensive luxury, really, or not a necessity. So I think that if we can get the big London transport projects, so the Bakerloo line upgrade and extension, Docklands Light Railway extension, and the West London Orbital, which is really important for Brent, I think that will help free things up.
A joined up cycle network would really help.
And a joined up cycle network, so that would be
I cycle quite a lot, and if you go from one borough to the next, I'm not going to name them, but some of them
Waltham Forest, isn't it? Poster child.
This is very good. Cycling. And then you have to go through another borough that's just south of it,
Newham.
and suddenly
and Tower Hamlet, I don't know,
potholes everywhere.
They are improving there, actually.
They are improving, but it needs a London-wide approach, and a lot of money, and then you would, lots of people want to cycle, but
Yeah.
they're actually scared of it.
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
And I think if you could
And
reduce that fear like you have in Amsterdam.
So I think the environment will be more conducive to not getting in your car and driving. I think we touched on it earlier on. I think the whole health and well-being and access to sort of greenery and open space and community gardens, etc., will be better. Living in London's good. I think for me it's good, and it'll just get even better in the future.
Good. Well, thank you so much for your time. That was really great. And thank you for coming on the show.
That's
Pleasure.
amazing. Thank you so much.